It was unconventional, to say the least, to send someone of his stature in first and alone. Usual protocol for such missions dictated that a contingent of stormtroopers accompany any officer. But perhaps this mission would go smoothly regardless. Sol 3 had been classified as an information age planet. Unaware of the wider galaxy, their civilization was still in its infantile stages, barely able to grasp the outer reaches of their own solar system. It had been rumored that the boy had fallen out of favor with the Supreme Leader. He had taken far too many steps backwards since the destruction of Starkiller Base. And this mission was a test, an attempt to apply pressure and see if this privileged boy would finally harden or shatter. He was tasked to gather information on the political and military structure of the planet and establish a First Order sympathizer cell. An assignment that was beneath his rank, yet these days rank meant very little when he failed to get results. Oddly enough, he had no problems finding like-minded individuals that shared in his taste in style and life philosophy. There were many individuals, especially amongst the younger population, that were dissatisfied with their station in life and held no loyalties to their planet. A quick promise of something better, more exciting, was all he needed to attract them to his cause. For once in his life, Klyo found himself fitting in quite nicely. For once in his life, there were no expectations, only a mutual understanding. Despite the fact that Klyo and his new followers came from different planets, they all had a shared experience of neglect from their parents, and they were angry about it. But unlike Klyo, they didn't kill random strangers to release their angst and emotions. No, they had something much better.
When I was a young boy, my father took me into the city to see a marching band.
Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So just to clear things up, no, there isn't a part 5 for the Separatist Alliance vs. Earth series. I left it open-ended for a reason. What happens is up to your imagination, and maybe Keanu Reeves. We are working on the Galactic Republic vs. Earth series, but that's taking longer than expected because we are collaborating with one of the most well-versed Clone Wars YouTubers. So instead I figured, guys, well, why not just start the First Order vs. Earth series? Alright, let's go. At first, Klyo's reports on Sol 3 were quite standard. Full of information with occasionally moody observations that everyone around him seemed happier than him. But then the messages became more sporadic, and the details in these messages became more sparse. Exactly 3 months after Klyo Ren had landed on Sol 3, he sent his last message. It simply read, "Snoke, no one understands me. Bye." Having wasted enough time waiting for Klyo to do a proper recon on the planet, Supreme Leader Snoke ordered the High Command to orchestrate an invasion plan based on what information Klyo had already gathered. General Hux naturally leapt at the opportunity. He was eager to pick up where his former rival had left off. Having Klyo lose his mind and going native was just a bonus. Located in the unknown region, Sol 3 was an average-sized terrestrial planet with bountiful natural resources. It was located in a particularly dangerous part of the galaxy, full of hyperspace anomalies and black holes. First Order researchers had only recently discovered the hyperspace routes. They had been saved from the archives by the Imperial Remnant when they fled Coruscant many years ago. It was a relatively pure planet by First Order standards. 99.4% of the sentient population were humans. The others were an assortment of saurian humanoids who lived beneath the surface, dolphins, and a few scattered tribes of Wookiees living in remote mountainous and forested areas. Oh, and then there was this one ancient Grey Jedi who lived in the southernmost point of the planet. Apparently, he used the ancient repulsor craft to deliver presents to children across the planet once every year. Unfortunately, due to advances in radar technology and anti-aircraft weaponry, he'd been limited to only the lesser developed areas of the world in the last few decades. The First Order would take care of him, of course, right after they got rid of those meddling dolphins. Lacking the resources of the glorious Galactic Empire, the First Order would need to be smart and careful. They didn't have the manpower or ships to carry out an occupation of the planet. What they required was a more subtle plan. One that preferably didn't require an occupation force. They came to Sol 3 to recruit manpower, not to expend it. The reports were all over the news. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office had confirmed a huge cluster of thousands of tiny objects were traveling on a collision course with Earth. Oddly enough, none of these fragments were larger than a few meters in length, which meant that there was no real danger to the planet. The media quickly dubbed the event as the heavenly show of a lifetime. People across the planet gathered outside, eyes glued to the sky. Day or night, it didn't matter. The atmosphere would be saturated with shooting stars. But hours before the first asteroids began passing Earth, the entire cluster of unidentified objects began slowing down. It was almost as if someone was firing retrograde thrusters on board. Earlier scientific models had predicted only 30% of the asteroid cloud would enter the Earth's atmosphere. The latest projections, however, showed that the number would now be closer to 99%. One by one, the news agencies of the world came to the correct conclusion that humanity was no longer alone in the galaxy. The ISS was the first casualty. Luckily, it had been evacuated several days in advance for safety reasons. What scientists had assumed were rocks and mineral-based asteroids turned out to be objects made out of forged metal. The world's governments were thrown into chaos as militaries and scientists scrambled to go through first contact protocols that were hastily established by the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. Even so, there was little hope of containing these alien visitors. Over the next 24 hours, there would be tens of thousands of impact zones across the planet. The last 5 days had been a blur for Joe Cullen. He had awoken inside a cramped escape pod alone, with enough food rations for a week, a bowcaster, and several detonators. He had no idea how he got to where he was. Glancing out the window, he saw the outlines of several thousands of other escape pods crowding the space around him. Ahead of him, a blue pearl of a world was growing larger by the minute. Even if he had controlled the pod, it wouldn't have mattered. The planet had him firmly in its grasp. He could only hope his pod was functional enough to survive the landing. His crash seat sure wasn't built for a Wookiee-sized passenger. It was scorching hot in the small town of Udanata, well over 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet, people couldn't help but venture outside. One of the odd extraterrestrial objects had landed just a few hundred meters outside of town. When they reached the crash site, they saw what appeared to be some kind of small pod. The lack of a giant crater must have meant the landing was somewhat controlled, and the pod seemed relatively intact. As the townsfolk got closer to the wreckage, suddenly there was a hiss. A door opened at the back of the pod, and out crawled an alien figure not unlike the lizards that were common in the outback, except this one was the size of a large human. Despite warnings from their local governments and news agencies, all across the world curious humans gathered around these mysterious pods, completely unprepared for the heavily armed aliens waiting inside of them. Well, in some places they were more prepared than others. But by nightfall, hundreds of thousands of heavily armed aliens were running wild across the planet. Well, that's where we're gonna end it off today, guys. Let me know what you guys think. Who are these aliens? What are they doing here? What is the First Order's plan to take over Earth? Well, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of this series. If you haven't seen our other Versus videos, check out this playlist right here. That should hold you over until tomorrow. A special thanks to all you Patreon supporters out there. You guys will be seeing a sneak peek on the Patreon site. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.